Welcome into this webinar that are having. I think you're going to be thrilled to be listening to the conversation this morning. I know I am. My name is Tricia Stiggy. I am the founder of a company called Transformation Strategies. We are an executive coaching and consulting firm based in the Philadelphia area. And we have a specialty focus in helping people and organizations explore how their lived experiences to date, whether those are from personal or organizational history, really impact their abilities to be as effective as they want to be. And the reason that we're doing this webinar series right now is because in my coaching work, there's a lot of common threads that seem to come up. One of them is going to be the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is people feeling just like they aren't good enough. And when I think about the workplaces today and the desire and drive to be emotionally intelligent and have emotional intelligent capacity in its leaders, I don't personally believe that a leader can really be emotionally intelligent unless they are really very self-aware of how their life to date, all of their experiences are impacting their abilities. And so during this webinar series, it's kind of what generated me to put it together, is there's a lot of undiscussables that really impact. So we're going to be talking about some of the undiscussables. We've already talked about shame. We're going to be talking today about some of the not good enough syndrome. We have conversations coming up about the imposter syndrome. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. We've got some superstars joining today, and I'm going to just turn it over and ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves. So Susan, why don't you take it off?
Thank you, Tricia, and thank you again for putting this series together. Both Carolyn and I really are pleased to be a part of this discussion. So in a nutshell, I am Susan Winchester, and I have been in the world of corporate HR for 36 years, with 16 of those years serving as the chief HR officer for 2 public companies. And I actually just announced my intention to leave that role and pursue my passion, which we'll be talking about today actually in this session, which is my work, where I think about and help teach people how to use the workplace as a laboratory for emotional healing. And so that is me.
Thank you. And Carolyn?
Yeah, Carolyn Swora. I am coming to you from the northern country of Canada. I'm in just outside of Toronto, and I call myself a human spirit igniter, and that is because I believe that there is a piece of us that just is waiting to be ignited to show up at work, at home, in our communities. And that's what I do my work in. Prior to having my own business doing this leadership and culture work, I was in big pharma for about 17 years. So I bring a really good mix of real life leadership work and then a lot of work with other industries and people.
Yeah. And again, one of the concepts that I had about having this panel discussions was to have frontline business leaders who are really living and breathing this, have HR component to talk about how these things are really impacting the business from an HR perspective with their hats on. And then myself as a OD consultant and coach that sees common issues and threads. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the performance syndrome. And I titled this, Are We Performing Ourselves to Death? Because in my opinion, we are driving people to work so hard and keep upping the bar all the time because that's what the marketplace is requiring. And yet we're seeing huge rises in work stress, which is leading to burnout. People not being able to really function at the levels because they are burned out or are so nervous about being good enough to perform that it shuts down all of their thinking and ability to create and be innovative. And this is one of the topics that I wanted to really talk about today. And Carolyn and Susan, I'm wondering if we could open our discussion by having each of you share why this topic is important to you, either professionally or personally. So Carolyn, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's very personal for me, having gone through a burnout of my own and feeling weak for it. and I won't get into everything that was going on in my life at that time, but anybody looking in and looking at that story would be like, are you kidding? How did you not burn out before then? I like to say I kind of suffered a partial burnout a few years ago, but the point is it caused me pain, and I wasn't able to perform from a work perspective, but more importantly, I lost connection with the people that I loved the most and wasn't able to show up for them in the way that I wanted to. So my sons, my husband, my friends, my mom, and that's really where this hits home. And we have choices. We have choices that we can make. And so I want to do this work to help people realize they have choices.
Thank you, Carolyn. How about you, Susan?
So this is such a topic that's so important. A couple of things that I would say. First of all, your comment, Tricia, that things are getting harder and companies are looking for more from all of us is true. And I think it's just the nature of business. And so I think an important factor to note is that if you're really good at your job, the company is always going to ask you to do more. And and so, of course, there's always pressures on most companies to do better, to do more with less, et cetera. And sometimes we think the company is pushing us. But I wanted to bring that into this discussion that if you're good at what you do, you should be happy that the company wants you to do more. So that's sort of the first place. The second place, and I can build it just based on expanding a little on my own resume. When I look at my 36-year career, why this topic matters so much to me, why it's so personal, 30 of those years were lived on what I call the unconscious wounded career path, where my entire accomplishments were driven out of my need to prove myself. And an unconscious understanding, I had no idea how much my need to prove myself, my daily beating myself up at the end of the day because I never felt like what I'd done was enough, or that it was wrong, or that I was going to get in trouble, or whatever. It was this constant, like a hamster on one of those wheels experience, going in, trying to meet everyone's expectations, trying to be the very best I could possibly be. And my response was sort of a spiral into sadness, fear, anxiety, and a lot of overachieving perfectionists, which I call myself, kind of recovering overachieving perfectionist, use unhealthy self-soothing habits to try to manage the emotional irregularity that we're experiencing when we're feeling anxious. Many of us have never learned how to manage that in a healthy way. My way was to use alcohol with Chardonnay. And so I'm very grateful that I've been sober now almost 20 years. But what I see in the workplace, and why I think this is such a relevant topic for your series, is that many of us unconsciously driven because of things that happened to us when we were little that we're completely unaware of. A lot of us come from a dysfunctional childhood that drives that need to constantly prove, constantly feel like we're never measuring up. And so I think there's great opportunity in unwinding that. And we can talk more about that in this discussion. But I am super excited that you are bringing this forward.
Well, thank you for both of you for sharing. Personally for me, my own dysfunctional, family of origin issues played out in my consulting world. I wasn't able to really effectively deal with clients. And also, it's not just something that happens in the workplace. As a self-employed person, it was coming up, and I had to really come to terms with it and really get in touch. As I was listening to what you were saying, Carolyn, one of the things that I started talking to HR business leaders about a few years back, this was before some of the trauma-informed conversation really started coming to light, which we're seeing more of. I seem to always be way ahead of where the curve is, but because they would look at me like I was a deer in headlights until I started talking about how this is potentially impacting their health insurance costs. Because as we're trying to do more and more, and you have people just trying to do more and more, that anxiety and depression ultimately translates into medicines, or like you said, coping. But it does impact the bottom line. And I think that's one of the key things that I wanted to make sure we talk about in our conversation today is how is all of this impacting productivity, but also the bottom line conversation, because it's not just about touchy-feely and feeling good and, emotional intelligence. There's a very real business case here for looking at these things.
Yeah. Like 100%. I mean, we would never create a product that had faulty elements to it. And in my experience, I'm seeing a lot of people in our workplaces who are burned out. They don't realize it, but they're so used to running so fast, so hard. As Susan was saying, we all have coping mechanisms. My coping mechanism was just finding more to do. And so we're exhausted, we're broken, we are unfulfilled, and I don't think that that's a stretch to say. It's a generalization. 2020 sort of tore the strip off of that, and so from a productivity perspective, we are not operating at full capacity, let alone, I don't even know what that percentage would be. So that is a really important way to look at this.
I think the other piece to add here is that so many of us perfectionists, people pleasers, are really good at hiding what's really going on for ourselves. Yeah. And all those, what I would describe as painful emotions, the fear, anxiety, the stress. One colleague I was talking to recently described how he feels every night is crushing. And I thought, oh my gosh, the emotions that people are managing behind the face of looking like we got it all together is significant. And for me, what I think about is organizations are always looking for ways to optimize performance and to optimize the potential of people in the organization. And yet when so many of us are spending a lot of energy managing these painful emotions behind the scenes at home in different coping ways, I think that's where organizations are missing out greatly in terms of overall potential capacity and performance. I think that's a huge opportunity that we haven't even talked about, really.
I'd like to add to that too, Susan. Speaking from personal experience, I didn't even know that I wasn't processing emotions. And I think that was like, no, everything's fine. Like, what are you talking about? I've got some hard things going on, but it's not a big deal. And so for me, it goes beyond emotional intelligence into emotional literacy and even understanding the warnings in our body, not even warnings, signals, cues, sensations, completely cut off from any communication my body was trying to give me.
Yeah, and then I'll just add on to that whole piece of the unconscious connection to what we learned about ourselves when we were growing up, how we developed our coping strategies when we were little to try to create a sense of safety, and how much those show up in our workplaces in unconscious ways. So for me, and again, this isn't about judging parents at all. I think every parent does the best they can, and many of our parents came from dysfunctional past. But I had a dad who was unpredictably angry. And it was scary. And so, of course, when you're small, you interpret it through the lens that it's my fault that he's getting angry. I'm not performing well, whatever the narrative might be. And so my way of trying to manage that unpredictability was to be in a constant state of hypervigilance, waiting for when the next, rage was going to occur. And then to try to be as perfect and as people-pleasing as possible to gain his affection, his whatever. And the unconscious piece for me was not even realizing for so many years in my own career that, just like Carolyn said, I was like, yeah, I'm good. I can do anything. I'm invincible. And, behind the scenes going, oh my God, I'm not, whatever, I'm not doing well. And it was all linked. And the research shows that, over 2/3 of us have experienced some significant trauma before the age of 18. And so it's not surprising. I think this is an epidemic, the sort of undiscussed epidemic in our organizations around how so many people are managing these painful experiences. And your point, Carolyn, is excellent, which is not even having awareness or literacy about what are the signals, what are the regulation techniques, what are my responsibilities as an individual in a company. That is such a beautiful, I love how you said that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is the conversation that I'm having with my clients and friends and family, is that I, for so many years, did not understand and comprehend what that T word meant trauma, healing, whatever. I don't need to heal. And just this, and it wasn't a bravado. It was a coping mechanism, although I didn't know how to label that. And I think the more that we can talk about this, we hear it's okay to say you're not okay. And I think we need to take that conversation one step further of, okay, and we can heal. And we can do this in our workplaces because we need to heal in connection with others. And the workplace is a very important community for so many of us. And so if organizations are truly going to live into the values that they claim, and with the fullest of good intentions, accountability, courage, collaboration, integrity, insert keyword here, then we really could help our employees, we could help our productivity, we could help our profits if we look to create true communities of healing to help us move forward.
No, I love this conversation because what was occurring to me is, okay, all of these things are important. I totally agree with. We need to create the environments when so many of us are spending so many hours there. I guess the question that occurs to me, how do we start making this happen? How do we create environments that give people permission to do this? When, a lot of leaders are focused on trying to, meet the stockholder requirements and, get this thing checked off because I have 5 other huge initiatives I'm trying to manage and all. And just to slow down and think about this, which in and of itself, it's not topics that people run to talk about themselves. A lot of it can be not so pleasant stuff to look at anymore. But so I'll just throw that out there. How do we start doing this?
Well, I can share what I've been doing, and I've been very grateful to have the support of my company, is I've been offering to leaders the opportunity to have me come in and do a keynote with their global teams. And most of the time they just trust me, because the focus of what I talk about is, I think what I'm talking about is a breakthrough way of thinking about mental wellness in the workplace. And so as leaders are listening to it, many times it's the first time they've heard it themselves. It's been really remarkable to me, regardless of what country I've spoken in, regardless to what level I'm speaking to, regardless to the kinds of jobs that people are doing in the company, the response is universal, which is it clicks, it resonates. People begin to make the connections to how they're experiencing the workplace. And having also the opportunity to talk externally as well, sort of the same kind of response. So I think the first thing is starting to educate about some of these topics. And Carolyn said it beautifully, is starting to help people understand some of the things that are happening that many of us never thought about. I never thought about my childhood as dysfunctional. I knew people had it way worse than I did. Trauma, I remember when a therapist said, I think you should go to a healing trauma program. I laughed, like, what are you talking about? So we just don't know. And I think the very first step is the education step, and it can come in lots of different forms. I'm sure you're doing it in your consulting practice with your clients. I know Carolyn's doing it with her organization as well, is helping people to understand what's really happening in the organization. And even just talking about it and opening up the dialogue and discussion, and having a senior leader stand up after they've heard me talk and say, I've made so many connections about how I am as a leader today. And another leader saying, this isn't not only helping us individually, but as leaders, it's helping to raise the emotional intelligence of leadership, to understand why people sometimes behave in odd ways in the workplace. We all have seen it. I've done it. We've all seen it, and wonder, gosh, what's wrong with that person? And, Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry's wonderful book, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, are shifting it from what's wrong with you or what's wrong with that leader, why would they act like that, to I wonder what happened to them. Yeah. Which totally changed. You talk about, Tricia, the need for more empathy. You start to think, oh, well, maybe that person's having, a really angry outburst about something that happened at work that seems totally over the top given the facts of the situation. But maybe it's triggered something that they're unconsciously responding from.
Yeah. And I'll just follow up. I know for me, when I started asking the what happened to you instead of what's wrong, it shifted my ability for curiosity and empathy, and made me realize, this is just another person trying to be a human being to the best of their ability. So it's a really powerful question. Carolyn, did you have anything?
Yeah, on top of what Susan said, I absolutely think knowledge is helpful, and really expanding our concept of wellness is a big piece of this, and understanding that we can't just shove our past under the carpet like I thought I could for so many years, and I'm strong enough. It's really through coaching. So I do a lot of coaching from a team perspective and from an individual perspective, which allows you and gives you a space to take a bit of a breath and invite reflectivity. And that's going to go at a different pace for everybody. That was really, really transformative for me. And as I said, we're all going to go at our own pace. But at the end of the day, there's a shadow on, I can't remember what the quote is, but there's a shadow to every piece of light. And understanding that leadership, especially in today's business environment, if you don't work out and get to know that shadow, you are going to unintentionally harm other people. And I am using that word harm intentionally. And I don't think many people want to do that. Yes, there's a small percentage of sociopathology in our workplaces, but for the most part, people really do have good intentions. So if you are going to step into a leadership role, then you need to step into self-leadership first and really get to know yourself, even if it is hard and scary. There are lots of wonderful coaches and consultants and organizations that can help you do that in a safe place. There's also therapists. Yeah.
I love it. When we were prepping for this discussion, Carolyn, I remember you were mentioning that when you're talking with your leaders and everything, you mentioned something about like it's your responsibility. I don't have the exact quote, but it's really your responsibility to be aware that this stuff exists. And you're also, I think you're doing work around what if we had some kind of Hippocratic oath for leadership. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? I'll tell you why this resonates for me, because my dad was a doc.
Yeah.
And that oath and everything I saw growing up, and I just love the concept of it.
Yeah, I wrote an article a few weeks ago on LinkedIn, and it was really, I grew up, my mom was an allied healthcare professional. And so I grew up in the medical industry or medical area. Wanted to be a doctor at one point and then decided against it. And I know that the Hippocratic Oath is a bit more of it's not a law necessarily, but it is an oath that everybody takes that's front of mind. And, being a leader in today's day and age, there's really a different level of responsibility, I think, than, 20, 30 years ago when I started to work. You could be a good manager and get by. But I think, if we took a pause and recognized the impact of our actions at the beginning, and have reminders in our leadership journey, I think it just gives us more pause for thought. And really, that's what a lot of this is about, is that our world is so fast paced, and we do ourselves justice by creating spots to pause and reflect. And I think, a version of the Hippocratic Oath, a leadership oath, could give us some pause for thought. It could open up the door for conversations. I'm not saying this is something we need to mandate, but I think pausing to think about, what do you want your leadership to look like? What do we want it to look like as a team?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, I also talk about with my clients about what do they want their leadership legacy to be. And this is kind of borderlining, the idea of like, what is your ideal leadership legacy? What kind of oath might you want to take? So,
and if I could, the one piece I would build onto this, because to the earlier conversation, so much of this is unconscious to us as leaders, is not only thinking about an oath, which I love that concept a lot. It's also about teaching people a different way of being leaders, of becoming, what I call living the conscious healing career path. So a big difference of being aware. I can talk about what I want my leadership legacy to look like, but be completely disconnected from my unconscious things that occurred when I was little. And so it's also, I think, about that teaching. It's another teaching element, which I think is a very hopeful and inspiring path, that we don't have to stay on that unconscious wounded career path, a place of misery and suffering. And to your point, leaders that are showing up that way, hurting entire teams, hurting cultures and organizational systems. And there's a completely different way to live your career, but it's stepping from that unconscious state to the conscious healing career state. It's a very different place to be.
Yeah. Susan, can you share the bumper car moments as well? I love Susan's book. I'll put a little plug in for that. And I've shared that with some colleagues, and just as a way to recognize, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, I'm fine, there's nothing happening. I think bumper car moments is a beautiful way to help people recognize, like, oh, okay, maybe not.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. And I love your book too. I highly recommend Evolve. It's a leadership book, is outstanding. So a big plug for you. So a bumper car moment is a concept that my co-author Martha Finney and I came up with when we were writing our book. And it really represents the experience that we have in the workplace when we come into conflict with another person, where it feels like there's been an emotional crash. So the idea of the bumper car moment is, thinking back to that time at the amusement park when we were riding around with our friends and family, laughing and, tapping one another's car. But then all of a sudden something happens, someone comes up behind you and slams into you, and your whole system has been, jarred. And that's what it feels like at work. It's those moments where emotions are high, where we feel emotionally triggered and upset, are what my co-author and Martha and I call bumper car moments. Is when there's been a crash. And sometimes we don't even realize, we may have done something that caused somebody else to get really angry with us. We may not even know what we did, but we've caused somebody else's response. Or somebody else has done something that's caused a response in us. So the bumper car moment can go lots of different ways. But the importance of it is understanding that it is a moment to pause, using your language, to say, okay, I am really emotionally triggered right now. I am feeling like I am stupid. I'm small. I'm not valued here. I can't believe that person interrupted me in the meeting and made me look bad. And kind of immediately go into whatever our old strategies were. It almost feels like tap dancing, like trying to people please or whatever. Some people show up as bullies. Some people try to hide. I mean, we all have our strategies. But those bumper car moments are actually the greatest opportunity for starting to learn new ways of responding, starting to disconnect our responses, our beliefs about ourselves, how we think we're supposed to behave in those moments of conflict, to begin to step onto that conscious healing career path. Because it's those bumper car moments when we are the most emotionally triggered, the most unconscious about how much is going on inside of us and how much energy is moving around that's never been processed, and how that's actually translating into our response with people we work with. And it can oftentimes have a very negative impact on other people and on our careers.
Yeah. I mean, I used to run from those moments, and that's why my corporate ladder stopped at a certain point, because physiologically, I didn't know this at the time. I didn't have the words for it, but physiologically, I could not tolerate the discomfort of conflict. And when we say conflict here, it doesn't mean like hands off and like, let's go at it. It means really sometimes as simple as somebody not agreeing with my perspective on something, and wanting to engage in a discussion about it. And I just physiologically couldn't handle it. And these are all things, to come back to the awareness. I thought this all was were things that I could figure out in, this part of my brain, the prefrontal cortex.
Yep.
And what we know now, well, others have known it for longer, but what we know so much more now about how trauma is stored in our body, and it's unconscious. It's through this back part here and in our brainstem, and it gets stored in ways that we cannot access through a cognitive method. And so I just think of how many people are physiologically unable to tolerate the conflict, or to be able to stop themselves from maybe, being a little bit more outward with their emotion. We cannot keep trying to have the solutions come from thinking more.
Could not agree more. And in that thinking, when that thinking gets triggered, and all the limiting beliefs, which is where we started this conversation, and then feeling like you're not good enough, that's that spiral down. It takes us into a spiral down. And I know myself, and I know many very amazing people I've worked with who will spend days, if not weeks, ruminating and replaying the situation and literally, almost amplifying it, right? I mean, we've all done it. We've all done it. I used to have this stupid designation. IOD was an issue of the day. That's where a conflict happened that I could handle in a day. Or IOW was, it's going to take a whole week to, unwind. An IOC, issue for a career, that was like, it's a wow. I'm done here. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get fired. I had little names for my triggered moment. Yeah. That's sort of sad, but it's true it's those emotionally charged moments. But those are actually the greatest opportunities for learning about why we're responding the way we are. But to your point, we have to process that emotion out of us before we can really move forward through sound, breath, and movement. And then we can decide to take conscious steps towards how we're going to respond rather than the old patterns that we used when we were little.
So here's a question that is occurring to me, because I want to go back to, this idea of we keep getting asked to perform more and more and more and more. I don't know whether you all saw McKinsey yesterday issued a warning to 3,000 of its consultants that if they didn't, up their game, they were going to get bolted out of the organization. That's paraphrasing it. But now in their words, they're like, we do this all the time. We go through, like Jack Welch used to do, his bottom 10% kind of thing. But I just started thinking about, these are really intelligent, smart people that have really gone to some of the best prestigious schools and everything, and they're being asked to perform. So if I go back to that conversation and tag it with what we've been talking about, what is your perspective from the two of you, that if we are able to start becoming more aware of our bumper car moments and how to deal with it, how will that then help us to be able to do this performing? I mean, I'm rambling a bit here, but I just don't know, like, there's got to be some kind of capstone we have. I mean, we're humans. We can't perform more and more and more. But how will this help unleash people's ability to better perform with the kind of requirements that are being asked of them?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, and it starts with the principles that Carolyn teaches in her book, self-awareness, self-regulation, and she talks about co-regulation. So I would like you to be able to talk about that as well. But I think what it really boils down to is that, stakes are high in every company. McKinsey's just one example. Every company is trying to figure out how to drive performance and productivity. And it's very easy to become a victim to that and to believe that we have to do everything at 100% of the time. Us overachieving perfectionists always believe, well, I'll just do it. I can do it. I used to think that I could meet everybody's expectations and wanted them to all feel like they were the only one that mattered to me. Well, that's really unachievable. It's unrealistic. And unfortunately, us perfectionists tend to set unrealistic goals of ourselves and other people. And so what's really important is to learn healthy techniques and healthy systems around how to manage expectations when the company's asking for more. I have some I can share. I'm sure you both do as well. A simple one that I am so glad someone taught me, because it totally changed my experience. Perfectionists think they have to do everything and they have to do it at 100%. And then one of my coaches, mentors along the way said, well, have you ever heard of the QQTR methodology or the 4Ds? And I'm like, I haven't heard of either one of those. Well, the 4Ds, which I don't know who to give credit to because it's been out there, is before you do something, decide, do I do it? Do I delegate it? Do I defer it? Or do I dump it? I had a colleague at Kellogg who used to put everything in a folder in a drawer, and he wouldn't respond until someone asked him 3 times to do something. So he just deferred everything. But that's the 4Ds. As a perfectionist, I thought I had to do everything myself. And then the QQTR stands for quality, quantity, time, and resources. So if my manager is coming to me and asking me to do more, I need you to do this new project and I need you to do it by Friday. The discussion, it's more of a negotiation discussion with your manager, rather than just saying, okay, and then going and, killing yourself trying to get it done, which so many of us have done, is to say, okay, if you need this on Friday, to what level of quality? Are you okay if I send you an email with some bulleted thoughts? Are you looking for a PowerPoint presentation? Do you want data analysis? Help me understand the depth and quality of what you want. In terms of quantity, each project would be different, but it could be, you want this to be a 50-page Word document or a 1-page summary. How much time? Okay, you say you need it on Friday. If I got it back to you by next Monday, would that work? Or, okay, if you need it on Friday, I was planning to do this by Friday. Are you okay if I move this one to next Wednesday? And so you're negotiating on quality, quantity, time, and resources. So if the answer is yes, I need you to do all of this within this amount of time to this degree of standard, then the answer is, well, I'm going to need Tricia and Carolyn to help me out with this. Is that okay? So it's a totally different way of doing the discussion.
Well, and being aware of your perfectionist tendencies and where that comes from, then allows you to begin being more confident about negotiating.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to make the connection once we're aware of what kind of issues are driving us towards, perfectionism or whatever, and becoming confident that, that's what's going on here.
Beautiful.
Now I can start playing the game differently because I'm aware. Yeah.
That's the conscious healing career path. That's exactly. Thank you for tying that together. Yep.
Yeah. When I hear headlines like that, I think a few things. Did the leaders at that organization really say it that way? Or is that just clickbait and trying to get eyeballs on this? And I think it also just shows this ongoing tension between need for growth and profits. And I get that. That's capitalism. And I think where we as individuals can play a role in this is we don't have to be silent recipients of being told what to do. And this means, as Susan was saying, engaging in those conversations with the folks, the leaders that pass down that direction. It's not, I haven't been in a workplace in years that firmly believes do as I say. There definitely is a real belief, at least written, that we're going to collaborate and figure this out together. Yep. And this is where this sort of vicious circle or cycle comes in. Yep. If I'm not used to being able to have a conversation with a person who I report to, or maybe even 2 or 3 levels up, or maybe there's a different identity, like there's a whole lot of things going on here. But if I am not able to have a conversation to ask some of those questions or all of those questions that Susan was saying, and get curious, I'm going to be sitting there in a place of internal judgment, and I will just sit there, receive, and then the burnout cycle continues. So this isn't saying that, okay, well, we all have to fix it individually. It's just saying there are different levers in here that's going to help us address this issue, because we're not going to stop hearing those. And at the end of the day, too, we can be working differently. We don't need to have 10 people at a meeting all the time. And hey, it just be okay if you're not at that meeting and somebody else is. But this is where we need to have the courage, and this is why I love doing the courage work that I do, to really understand what that looks like. And if we're truly going to get under that belly of courage, which is vulnerability, we know that the biggest barrier to vulnerability is trauma. So this is the cycle that we're in. And I don't think we can push any more out of our people. I think we're past the point of no return.
Yeah, thank you so much for kind of putting a different perspective on the comment that I made, Carolyn. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, in my work, when I began so I'll put on my change hat, what I began to realize is change wasn't occurring the way businesses were wanting it to occur. And in my perspective, it was right at the vertex of the leader and direct report. Because at the end of the day, a person will run through walls if they really trust their leader. They'll do whatever, pretty much whatever the leader wants them to do, but that trust has to be there. And so a leader really does themselves more service, being more vulnerable, being more self-aware, understanding their activators, understanding what drives them, and being able to build that trust, because that's, in my mind, a lot of what's needs to continue to be enhanced in organization. And it just goes back to the conversation we've been having about understanding your trauma points and things like that. The other thing that occurs as we begin to wrap this up, the other thing that was occurring to me again with my change hat on was I really believe we are seeing a shift in the world about awareness around trauma and its impact. It's been in the healthcare world for a while and social work and things like that. But I think it's starting to shift now in organizations with conversations like we're having and, journals and things. Well, the first step in any kind of major change is about awareness. And so that is really, I believe, what is happening, and part of this conversation, I think, floods into the, aware. We're talking about awareness a lot. So that's just my 2 cents about that.
If I could just put one little point on the concept of trauma, because some companies don't like to even talk about that word.
Yeah.
Some people aren't comfortable talking about that word. I didn't connect with that word at all either. Thinking about my own past was like, yeah, no. But I actually followed my therapist's recommendations and did the healing trauma program at Onsite, a wonderful organization, 7-day intensive program. And one of the things the point of becoming educated about this work is understanding that trauma can be defined in different ways. They taught the concept of the big T trauma, like, the 10 adverse childhood experiences, mental, sexual, physical abuse kinds of things. But they also talked about little T trauma, which are things that happen over time, chronic things that happen over time that collectively equate to a big T trauma. And so I remember doing an exercise as a part of that experience, and we had to detail out our life through, thinking through some of the things that had happened. And at the end, the therapist turned to me and said, "You had a lot of trauma," but it was all sort of those little T traumas. So many of them were little T's that I minimized them, I rationalized them, I dismissed them, and had no idea of how much they were affecting me. So I think it's important that we all become educated to the point that's been made.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too, having written a book that has the T word on the front of it, The Path to Trauma-Informed Leadership, is there is a physiological connection here. And some of your listeners might have heard this word polyvagal theory been floating around. And I think this is going to be transformative if we allow it into our leadership curriculum. Polyvagal theory is the science of safety. And the science of safety can help us understand how to create truly psychologically safe environments. The thing is our cognitive brains don't understand this, right? All of this takes place at the brainstem level, or a good portion of it takes place there. And so that, I think, is a really important conversation to tie into this trauma word, if we're going to use it, or healing, which is to make more capacity for our bodies, our nervous system, to be more flexible in how it reacts and what it deems safe and what is not safe. And so that's an area that I'm digging into now, to be able to provide that science so people realize, okay, this is not a weakness. This is not something that's wrong with me. And the other thing that it does too is I think it has the potential to take this blame away, like, oh, well, so-and-so is not very strong. Like, I went through more, and we don't want to get into that, right? At its core, I mean, I think the most simplest definition of trauma that I found was from Gabor Mate, which was, it's an emotional wound. And I think we can all connect with being wounded at some point. And now for some others, obviously that's deeper and it can go and be much more extensive than that. But there are a lot of myths and incorrect beliefs about what that word means.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carolyn. I'm looking forward to the day that the word becomes more normalized and understood, because it is a very misunderstood word.
Yeah.
So as we begin to wrap up, I thought I would just ask the two of you, are there some books or podcasts, articles that you would recommend people kind of gravitate to or take a read of? We'll put these all in the links below, but Susan, obviously, let's start with you. Obviously, your book, Healing at Work.
Yeah, I mean, Healing at Work, which has the bumper car right on the front, I would highly recommend. It's been very well received, with great feedback from some really great people who've read it, including Jack Canfield, co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, who said it's in his top 5 favorite books of all time. But I thought of a couple of others as we've had this conversation today. One is a wonderful book by a woman named Debbie Ford called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And it really gets at that shadow piece of us as leaders. It's a beautiful book, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And then the other book, in thinking about how so many of us don't like conflict, is a book called The Power of Discord by Dr. Ed Tronick and Dr. Claudia Gold. And so those are 2 books I thought of when we were talking. Actually, Dr. Perry, who wrote the book with Oprah, is the one who recommended to me to read The Power of Discord, because he loved the concept of the bumper car moments as being the catalyst for emotional healing at work.
Great, thank you.
Those are my ideas.
Yeah. So yeah, my book is Evolve: Path to Trauma-Informed Leadership. So yeah, I just kind of wrote that to say, hey, like, want to come in and look at another way to lead. It's an invitation, and I use myself as a sort of as a an example. There's another great book coming out by Kelly Campbell. I think, are you having her on your show?
She's on with me. Yep, the next.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I've been fortunate to be one of the early readers on it. And, you know, when anybody asks me about this topic, I refer them to Susan's book and now Kelly's book when it comes out, because what I love about it is it integrates this concept of trauma, but it's got a forward-facing sort of perspective, which is really helpful. Again, if we come back to the science of safety, is it can pull us into, oh, okay, here's what is possible. So those would be, 2 books that I would highly recommend. You know, there's also some great books around conscious leadership, the conscious organization, as well, that I think really help immerse us into a deeper level than self-awareness or emotional intelligence. And those are all great books as well. I think where, Susan, I'll speak on your behalf here, but you can tell me if I'm stepping out of line. We want to kind of push that one step a little bit further. And move beyond like, oh yeah, I know what emotional awareness is, to something that really inspires you to dig in deeper and look at some more uncomfortable sides. And so another book that was really, really helpful for me was it wasn't the Complete Enneagram. I can't remember, but the author was Uranio Pius and Beatrice Chestnut. So Bee's written a whole lot of books in the Enneagram space, and they partnered to create this one. And it's specifically for leaders to help them understand these other sides in this personality system called the Enneagram. And I find that's really helpful, again, from a leadership perspective.
Great.
Yeah.
And of course, both of your newsletters, and I would encourage everybody to, again, I'll put links in the comments below. My newsletter, Susan's newsletter, Carolyn's, weekly podcast and newsletter. I would say, we're running with the crowds right now, quite frankly, that are really making these kind of knowledge deposits in organizations, and keep in touch with any one of us, and you'll be led to, you'll be continued to be led through this conversation going forward.
Yeah. And Tricia, we can't forget, I've had both of you on my podcast as guests as well. And Kelly will be on it as well. So that's another, if you want to listen, there's some great podcasts there too. I know Katie Kurtz has a great one about being trauma informed. Yeah.
Good. So again, as we just kind of wrap up our discussion, were there any kind of closing thoughts that each of you wanted to make here?
I just appreciate you initiating this discussion and series, because I do think it's going to take more and more. And what I love about what's happening is that we're all starting to connect with one another. And so I think we're on the early verge of a significant movement in the corporate world related to how we think about capability, potential, performance, mental wellness, mental well-being. And so I feel very encouraged and hopeful about the future that we have ahead of us as we continue these discussions, education, providing tools and strategies and concepts to help our organizations and our people and leaders be more effective.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I would end with, and maybe it's, is life goes by really fast. And, many of us have had, I'd say all of us have had some sort of loss in our life. And my hope is that we don't have to experience such tragic loss or get to a point in our life where we have too many regrets. And I think work creates such a foundation for us to thrive, but it also creates a place where we can get lost and lose ourselves. And so that would be sort of my last word for people is, it doesn't have to be that way. And it might feel really hard and you might feel alone or no one understands. And just that, we see you and there are ways out of it step by step. You don't, as a colleague said yesterday, you don't have to eat the whole elephant all at once. But yeah, there's small steps, and it's these small steps that make the journey and the path out of the darkness into the wonder and joy of what we can experience.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, well, I'm thrilled. I know I'm working right right at the vertex of where I want to be working, and it's really there's such joy in my heart when I have conversations with folks like you, and I see what's happening in organizations and in my work with clients. I'm really excited about what the future is holding. So thank you again so much. Such a great conversation. We could probably go on for hours as we always can, but hopefully, some of the tidbits that you have heard today will kind of take root in your own souls and your own leadership work. And Carolyn and Susan, thanks again so much for joining, and best of luck. And we will all see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks Tricia.
Carolyn, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good seeing you too, Susan.
Tricia. Bye.